myself, yourself, many people in this community around Australia have fought hard and made many sacrifices during the tyranny that we all experienced. It was absolutely awful what happened in Melbourne. It was actually awful what happened to patients with their lack of informed consent. And I am concerned that this may happen again in this country. We don't know when the next pandemic or biothreat may occur. And next time we must be prepared to speak out despite any penalties, because it's that freedom of speech that guarantees our liberty, nothing else.
On August 17, 2022, the Medical Board of Australia suspended one of the country's most outspoken doctors for going against the official COVID narrative. This past Friday, almost 2.5 years on, the Brisbane Supreme Court overturned the outrageous suspension, handing down its bombshell ruling in favour of Dr. William Bay. Joining us now is the man himself. Doctor, thank you for joining us and congratulations on your win. I guess for the viewers that haven't been following your story now for a few years, how did this all start? What happened?
Well, the pandemic started, and more importantly, the government and the medical regulators sought to suppress doctors' free speech during the pandemic. Avi, they issued an order in the 9th of March 2021 via email to all health practitioners saying that you couldn't criticise the government, couldn't criticise the vaccines, and you had to deny ethics and informed consent to your patients. So this was an outrageous turn of events, and I didn't take it lightly. I actually created a protest organisation, Queensland People's Protest, and went out and did 45 protests around Australia to get the message out that it was absolutely necessary that informed consent be given to the Australian people. One of those protests involved me protesting the entire AMA, Australian Medical Association National Conference about COVID in July of 2022 in Sydney, which got me an immediate suspension without any trial. I wasn't even allowed to attend my trial. And the head of the medical board that suspended me was found by the Supreme Court of Queensland last Friday to have engaged in a cover-up with the AMA to lodged that complaint against me, and the judge found that they engaged in bias, procedural unfairness, and had denied my right to speak freely about the vaccines. And so I'm very pleased with this outcome late last week.
Yeah, it's a massive win for you. Is there any sort of shift? What does this mean beyond you personally?
Well, I think there should be a massive shift with the freedom of clinicians in Australia and hopefully around the world to speak freely about these vaccines or any other therapeutics, indeed anything that they think they are qualified or want to speak on. Free speech is absolutely the basis for humanity, for democracy, and for the best medical treatments. I mean, it's just ludicrous to think that the medical regulator would allege, like they did in court, that my speech was harming the Australian people. I was suspended with emergency powers because it was alleged that I was a serious risk to the health and safety of Australia. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. And the judge asked the King's Counsel, please tell me how and where William has hurt patients. But he could not. The barrister could not point to a single instance where my speech had harmed anybody. And I think that's what led to this resounding victory for myself, because not only had they denied me procedural fairness and engaged in bias to suspend me and to stop me working for 2.5 years, but they had been alleging that I'd been practicing illegally and unlawfully and breaching code of conducts, which were clearly not true, as the judge found in his judgment.
Well, his judgments seems quite scathing. We'll go through Rod Lampard's 10-point summary, where he says the first one is the board's decision to suspend Dr. Bay was biased. The board did not afford Dr. Bay procedural fairness. None of the reasons for the suspension concerned his clinical practice, which seems to me a quite important one. The board wrongly interpreted pandemic laws to suspend Dr. Bay. The board denied Dr. Bay due process. The board protected government and itself from political criticism, which is wild to me because I would have thought, firstly, political criticism of the government during any crisis is what ensures the integrity of a democracy. And we saw that fail during COVID, but even more so, political criticism of a medical board. Why are they getting involved in politics in the first place? It should be 100% medical. Is that not right?
Yeah, absolutely. As you've said, none of the complaints, there were 5 complaints against me. None of them were for a patient. I've never had a patient complain against me. One of those complaints was actually from the APRA, the medical regulator itself. They complained about me, Avi, to themselves and adjudicated on themselves and referred themselves back to themselves to make a decision against me. And so these were the type of procedural unfairness elements that the judge found were completely wrong. And yes, he said that APRA did not have the right to be immune from political criticism. And of course, the Constitution has an implied freedom to protect us, to express our right to political communication in this country. So, again, I think this has been a fantastic result that Justice Bradley issued in the Supreme Court.
It's almost worse than judge, jury, and executioner because they're also the complainant. They're also the victim. So you've got the victim, judge, jury, and executioner. Wild stuff. 7, he says the board persecuted Dr. Bay and continued to do so even in court. They pursued a combative approach to Dr. Bay long after the emergency public health orders ended. Number 9, APRA has to pay Dr. Bay's legal costs and reinstate his GP status. How did that feel to read that?
Oh, it was fantastic to have not only my suspension and investigation overturned immediately, but to have it backdated back to 2022. I think this should provoke confidence in all medical practitioners and doctors that if you do get in trouble for speaking your mind against APRA, the courts will have your back and you can speak freely. I mean, that is actually what doctors are supposed to be doing. We are supposed to be giving the risks and benefits to patients. So please do not be afraid, Doctors of Australia. I've gone in there and had a go. I was self-represented, Avi, and I've still had a win against 10 lawyers in the Supreme Court of Queensland. So if I can do it, other doctors can too.
That is wild. It's mind blowing, the whole thing. Number 10, he says the board failed to apply due diligence. I don't know. Do you need
Well,
due diligence when you're the victim, judge, jury, and executioner?
well, Well, that's exactly right, Avi. They were so drunk on power that they accused me in open court of practicing illegally as a doctor because I was not vaccinated. Now, that actually wasn't even the subject of the case at all. The case was about me suing APRA for illegally suppressing my free speech. But I had to defend myself in court, and I said, Your Honour, I had vaccine exemptions. That's why I was able to practice as a doctor without the vaccine. And the barrister said that there's no way that could have happened. William didn't meet the medical criteria to get an exemption and blah, blah, blah. And it was just so arrogant to see APRA's attitude laid out bare for the court that they thought they knew more about my clinical situation than I did, especially as me as a doctor. And later, in post-trial submissions, they had to admit that that accusation was entirely unfounded. And in fact, APRA had known for more than a year that I did in fact have those lawful exemptions. So that was just complete bad faith defamation in court to try and denigrate my character.
So I guess you touched on it a minute ago. The message you have for other doctors is stand up and speak out even during a crisis, and they'll attempt to persecute you, but in the end, if you fight on, justice will prevail. Is that the message?
That is absolutely the message. Myself, yourself, many people in this community around Australia have fought hard and made many sacrifices during the tyranny that we all experienced. It was absolutely awful what happened in Melbourne. It was actually awful what happened to patients with their lack of informed consent. And I am concerned that this may happen again in this country. We don't know when the next pandemic or biothreat may occur. And next time we must be prepared to speak out despite any penalties, because it's that freedom of speech that guarantees our liberty, nothing else.
How long have you been practicing as a doctor?
I'm actually a relatively new doctor, Avi. I only got my license in 2015. So I was in the junior stages of my career when I decided to give it all up for the benefit of free speech. And it's going to be a long road back to getting myself back on my feet, I think, because even with this victory, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, of which I was a member, has said that I'm not welcome back despite my finding of innocence. So there is still persecution in this country, as you know. That is why the fight must go on. But I think that with God's help, we will win.
Why did you risk everything for it at the time?
It really was a spiritual journey for myself, Avi. I felt during that pandemic touched by God, and I felt that He asked me to fight for freedom, and I just simply answered the call. I felt that when it came to a time that I had an opportunity to do something for freedom and human rights, I had to do something.
How long was this whole ordeal for you?
I was suspended for almost 2.5 years. That's right. I did get arrested for protesting peacefully outside of APRA's office in Brisbane. The magistrate there found that I'd breached no crimes, no laws, and had been unlawfully arrested. So it has been a period of financial suffering for about 2.5 years, especially when APRA not only cancelled my license as a doctor, but intimidated me with compliance letters to not work in any job whatsoever that was related to healthcare, which the judge found was illegal as well.
So what did you do to survive in 2.5 years? What have you been doing?
I survived through God empowering people or inspiring people to donate to me, basically, Avi. When money was low, somebody would turn up and donate to me. And when that ran out, I did a bit of Bitcoin trading. Isn't that a golden thing? And when that ran out, I had to resort to Uber Eats driving, which was a great way to bring some humility to a once arrogant doctor, Avi.
An overqualified Uber Eats driver. That's the kind of thing you hear about when, Eastern Europeans fled to Australia and they were, qualified doctors. Or I've seen Persians that have come here, but their qualifications weren't recognised in Australia, and then they were working in Uber Eats. I just wouldn't imagine something like that happening to a qualified Australian doctor, all because he had medical opinions, which I thought was what we pay him to have. Is it not?
It absolutely is. Not only was I allowed to speak freely during the pandemic, but I was, as a doctor, one of the people that you would expect to speak during the pandemic. I mean, this country had a pandemic plan prior to the pandemic, our biosecurity plan, and none of that included lockdowns and all these forced vaccinations. So why did we not follow our plans? Why did we go against all the principles of freedom and informed consent? I think that there has been an international conspiracy element of this from America, from the WEF, from Bill Gates, that has ruined the lives of so many people in this country, and that is why we must continue to fight for medical ethics and the right to freedom in this country so this never happens again.
If you think it's important for the world to witness this vindication, make sure to like, comment, most importantly, share it far and wide so that next time more physicians stand up bravely like Dr. William Bay. And then head over to rebelstore.com.au. Get yourself or your loved one a last-minute Christmas present that stands for something while supporting your favourite news network. rebelstore.com.au. Go now.